AITA for running away after catching my dad with my crush. I, 17, had always looked up to my dad. He was my hero, my role model, the person I turned to for advice and support. So when I caught him with my crush, it felt like my whole world came crashing down. It all started innocently enough. My crush, let's call her Sarah, had been coming over to our house more often. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe she was just being friendly, I told myself. But then I started to notice the way my dad looked at her, the way he laughed at her jokes a little too hard, the way he always seemed to find an excuse to be around her. I tried to push those thoughts aside. Surely, I thought, there was no way my dad would ever betray my trust like that. But then one day, I came home early from school and walked in on them in the living room. They were sitting close together on the couch, whispering and laughing, and my dad had his arm around her shoulders. I froze in shock, unable to believe what I was seeing. Sarah looked guilty, her eyes darting around the room, while my dad just stared at me, his expression unreadable. I didn't know what to do, so I turned and ran. I ran out of the house, tears streaming down my face, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop running until I reached the park a few blocks away. I collapsed on a bench, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. How could my dad do this to me? How could Sarah betray my trust like that? I felt like I was living in some kind of nightmare. As I sat there, I heard my phone buzz in my pocket. It was a text from my best friend, asking if I was okay. I told her what had happened, and she immediately offered to come pick me up. I gratefully accepted, knowing I couldn't face going back home right now. When my friend arrived, I climbed into her car and let the tears flow freely. She listened patiently as I poured out my heart to her, recounting every painful detail of what I had seen. She hugged me tightly, reassuring me that everything would be okay, that I didn't deserve to be treated like this. As we drove aimlessly around town, I couldn't shake the image of my dad and Sarah together out of my head. How long had this been going on? Had they been sneaking around behind my back this whole time? I felt sick to my stomach at the thought. Eventually, my friend suggested we grab some food at a nearby diner. I numbly agreed, grateful for the distraction. As we sat at a booth, picking at our food, I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal swirling inside me. I couldn't understand why my dad would do this to me, why he would jeopardize our relationship like that. After we finished eating, my friend drove me back home. I dreaded facing my dad and Sarah again, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. As we pulled up to the house, I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. I walked up to the front door and hesitated before opening it. I braced myself for whatever confrontation awaited me on the other side. Would my dad try to explain himself? Would Sarah apologize for her part in all of this? I didn't know what to expect. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet, and I heard muffled voices coming from the living room. I steeled myself and walked in, ready to face whatever was waiting for me. To my surprise, I found my dad and Sarah sitting on the couch, looking guilty and anxious. They both looked up as I entered, and my dad stood up, his face pale. "Son, I'm so sorry," he stammered, his voice shaky. "I know this must be hard for you to understand, but Sarah and I have feelings for each other. I never meant for it to happen, but we care about each other." I felt a surge of white-hot anger at his words. How could he stand there and try to justify what he had done? I felt like my whole world was falling apart around me, like I couldn't trust anyone anymore. I turned and ran. I ran out of the house again, tears streaming down my face, my heart breaking into a million pieces. I didn't stop running this time, not until I reached the park again. I collapsed on the same bench, feeling utterly lost and alone. As I sat there, my mind raced with a million different thoughts and emotions. How could my dad do this to me? How could Sarah betray my trust like that? I felt like a fool for ever trusting either of them, for letting them into my life and my heart. I heard my phone buzz in my pocket again. It was a text from my dad, begging me to come back home so we could talk. I ignored it, feeling too hurt and betrayed to even consider facing him right now. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him for what he had done. I stayed at the park until it started getting dark, lost in my own thoughts and emotions. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of pain and confusion, like I didn't know which way was up anymore. The betrayal cut deep, leaving a wound that I didn't know if it would ever heal. As I sat there, the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. I felt like I was suffocating, like I couldn't breathe. How could my dad do this to me? How could he throw away our relationship for a fling with my crush? I knew I couldn't stay at the park forever. Eventually, I gathered up the strength to stand up and make my way back home. I didn't know what awaited me there, but I knew I had to face it. I couldn't run from this forever. As I walked back to the house, my thoughts were a jumble of anger, sadness, and confusion. I didn't know how to process everything that had happened, how to make sense of the mess my life had become. I felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all. When I reached the house, I took a deep breath and pushed open the front door. I walked into the living room where my dad and Sarah were waiting for me. I looked at them, my heart heavy with hurt and betrayal. I opened my mouth to speak, to confront them about what they had done. But before I could say anything, my dad stood up and started to speak. "Son, I know you're hurting right now. I know I've let you down, and I'm so sorry for that, but Sarah and I care about each other. I hope you can understand that," he said, his voice pleading. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could he stand there and try to justify his actions? How could he expect me to just accept what he had done and move on? I felt like a complete stranger to him, like he didn't know me at all. I stood there, my fists clenched at my sides, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't find the words to express the depth of my hurt and anger. I felt like a volcano about to erupt, like I was on the edge of a breakdown. Without a word, I turned and ran. I ran out of the house, out of my life as I knew it, out of everything that had once felt safe and familiar. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I couldn't run anymore. And there I was, back at the park, staring up at the stars as tears streamed down my face. I felt like I was free-falling, like I had lost my anchor in the world. The betrayal cut deep, leaving a wound that I didn't know if it would ever heal. As I sat there, alone in the darkness, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up to see my best friend standing there, her face filled with concern and compassion. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. I shook my head, unable to find the words to express the storm inside me. She sat down next to me, putting an arm around my shoulders, offering me comfort and understanding. We sat there in silence, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I didn't know if I could ever find peace with what had happened, if I could ever trust again. And as the night stretched on, I found myself asking the same question over and over in my mind. Am I the asshole? Update. Days turned into weeks, and the wound left by my dad's betrayal and Sarah's deceit refused to heal. I tried to push the painful memories aside, to bury them deep down and move on with my life. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, their guilty looks, the shattered trust between us. I avoided going back home as much as possible, staying with my friend or crashing on other friends' couches. I couldn't stand the thought of facing my dad and Sarah, of having to look them in the eye and pretend like everything was okay. The pain and anger simmered just beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. My dad tried to reach out to me to talk, to apologize, but every text message and phone call only fueled the fire burning inside me. I couldn't bring myself to forgive him, to forgive them both for what they had done. The betrayal ran too deep, cut too close to the bone. I kept running, both physically and emotionally, trying to escape the turmoil that had taken over my life. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the reality of what had happened, the shattered pieces of my trust and love scattered on the ground. Conclusion. In the end, the rift between me, my dad, and Sarah only deepened. The betrayal and hurt were too much to overcome, the wounds too raw to heal. We became strangers in the house we once shared, passing each other like ships in the night, avoiding each other's gaze, each other's presence. I never found closure or peace in what had happened. The pain and anger lingered like a dark cloud over my head, casting a shadow over every interaction, every thought. I couldn't bring myself to forgive them, to let go of the hurt that threatened to consume me. And in turn, they couldn't understand the depth of my feelings, the weight of their actions on my heart and soul. They saw me as the one who ran away, who couldn't face the truth, who couldn't move on. And I saw them as the ones who destroyed my trust, who shattered my world, who left me broken and alone. In the end, the relationships that once meant everything to me lay in ruins, irreparable and irreconcilable. The fallout from that fateful day at the park reverberated through our lives, leaving us all hating each other, resenting each other, unable to bridge the gap that had formed between us. And as I walked away from the house that had once been my home, from the people who had once been my family, I knew that the scars left by their betrayal would never fade. The ache in my heart, the emptiness in my soul, the feeling of being adrift in a world that no longer made sense. It would always be there, a constant reminder of what had been lost, of what could never be regained. Was the op in the wrong? Comment down below and make sure to like and subscribe.